Mets fans, do we have ourselves quite the discussion on this Black Friday edition of Mets News and Rumors here in WardyNYM, that being November 28th, 2025. Because we saw news drop this past night, and I purposely wanted to have a designated video for it in its entirety instead of lumping it with last night's video and topics, because it dropped right as I was still in the process of finishing yesterday's video on Jeff McNeil trade suitors, Tyler Glass now potentially being available in trade, as crazy as it is to say, and the latest from Freddie Peralta and the Brewers that you guys can check out after watching this video. But the news that came out last night that has a lot of Mets fans in a stir on X especially is that yes, Framber Valdez is expected to sign with the New York Mets at $200 million. Where is this coming from? How credible is this reporting, if at all? And ultimately, what is the likelihood, unlikelihood of this actually coming to fruition? And what are the Mets getting? And the veteran southpaw Framber Valdez, who I've broken down at great length on the platform and will continue to do exactly that, is what we're going to deep dive right here, right now. Hit that like and subscribe button on your way, and everybody, let me know your initial thoughts, reactions, and analysis in the comments down below. Framber Valdez? $200 million in a Mets uniform? Is David Stearns really going to do something that he has not had the appetite to do in recent years? He may, and we're going to get into all the pros and cons and everything that you need to know in this one, everybody. So thank you again for helping us get closer to 36,000 subscribers. Once we get there, we'll be giving away a jersey to one lucky subscriber on the platform, all just for being great supporters. And separately on X today, everybody, I have a fun little promo going. Should the Mets sign a top 3 starter for their rotation, meaning that he would be at worst a number 3 in their rotation, and trade for someone of similar status, meaning the Mets will have to land 2 quality starters this offseason. Should they do that, I will be giving away a jersey of one of those players to a lucky follower of mine on X that simply likes the post and make sure they bookmark it. So check that out on X should you guys have interest. Also check out SeatGeek that has you covered for all of your ticketing needs. Use my promo code WARDY10, link down below in the description, because you're going to get 10% off for whatever you need in the ticketing space, whether that's NFL tickets, NHL tickets, MLS tickets, NBA tickets. We're looking at concerts, comedies, you name it. SeatGeek again has you covered. WARDY10, link down below for 10% off. But let's go ahead and let's deep dive this news right here, right now, because I certainly do not want to waste any time with this one. And it starts here with the following, everybody. So Hector Gomez, for those who are unaware, has been a longtime MLB insider that we have seen based out of the Dominican Republic. And because of that, naturally, Hector has far more sources and far more credibility when covering Dominican and to a degree Puerto Rican players among others than he does talking about other players. And it makes sense given the fact that this is kind of his niche, if you will, as someone who's based in the DR. So naturally word gets around a lot for him, and he has been both right and wrong and abundance of times. I mean, to say Hector Gomez is credible, it's really hard to say that when you know how much he has swung and missed. But you also say to yourself, he's someone who has very much been on the nose with reporting multiple times over the past 4.5 years since I started covering the Mets as a full-time thing on YouTube. So much so that Hector is actually a follower of mine on X because of it, because of our interactions. And he first came out with a post last night which stated the following: Framber Valdez and his place among the starting pitchers of the last 5 seasons. 68 wins, first in baseball, 900 plus innings, 5th in baseball, and a 3.2 ERA, best for the 4th best in all Major League Baseball. We know Valdez has a fantastic track record. I don't think any rational baseball fan would tell you otherwise when evaluating him in his free agent market. But the reason as to why, when we evaluate someone like Valdez in particular, why there's a bit more question marks has a bit to do with obviously when he threw at his catcher, at least it appeared that way this past season, and someone who isn't getting younger that's seeking a long-term contract. Dylan Cease just got 7 years, 210, right? I can also tell you in confidence that the Mets were involved in Dylan Cease's market. However, they were not at all willing to go to the lengths of 7 years. If I'm not mistaken, the Mets were in the 3 to 5 year range at most for Cease and weren't going farther than that. And he, of course, took the biggest contract and the biggest offer imaginable from the Blue Jays after coming off of a season with a 4.5 ERA. So, makes sense. In the case of Valdez, though, we're not here to talk about what his stats say, how good he's been the past couple years, as we're here to talk about why you clicked on this video. Because he interacted with a fellow follower of mine, actually, because he's a Mets fan, Luis Valdez. Shout out to Luis. Hope you're doing well, my guy. He said, I hope that the Mets sign him. They need him. In reply to that post, and Hector replies the following: the Mets are the favorites to sign Framber Valdez. It is expected that they will sign him for 6 years at $200 million. So, initial reaction to this, everybody. Could this be true? Yes. When you connect the dots as to why there is a level of credibility with Hector Gomez, it starts with the following. Who is Hector Gomez's brother? Oh, yeah. It's the man who the Mets literally just hired as their first base coach, and Gilbert Gomez. Don't believe me? This is Hector sharing his excitement, breaking family news. My brother Gilbert Gomez has been hired as the first base and outfield coach for the New York Mets in 2026. And mind you, Gomez was previously the Mets High A affiliate for the Brooklyn Cyclones manager there. He helped the Cyclones win it all that we saw in the minor leagues this year. He also helped the Cyclones be the second best in their league this year with 257 stolen bases. So going from Antoine Richardson to Gilbert Gomez should hopefully be a smooth transition barring changes. But the point stands, not only does Gomez have connections and have industry sources, but his brother actively works in the Mets organization. And we're not long removed from Carlos Mendoza's son, his young son, breaking the news on TikTok last winter that the Mets are landing Juan Soto. He had it before anyone else, technically. All right. And he was on the nose with it. So I'm not saying that Gilbert is relaying endless information, but what I am saying is that there is a level of credibility now, especially now more than ever in the Mets organization, for Hector Gomez to be making certain remarks. But here's what lies the issue for me, and I think for many. And that's why I am not running with this and saying that, oh, the New York Mets for certain are going ahead and giving a massive deal here to Framber Valdez. That it's an actual lock to happen. To anyone that is saying that in the respective content space or they're writing articles, blogs, they're BSing you. They're just trying to get clicks, everybody. And that's how this works in the game naturally. And I understand this as someone who's a content creator who is incentivized to do their best to drive clicks daily. However, I do not want to steer you guys in the wrong direction. And I feel like I would be doing that if I got up here giddy, all excited about Framber Valdez as a locked line with the Mets, when you need to understand the track record of Hector Gomez and how he's operated as a MLB insider for DR over the past number of years. And when I tell you that Gomez is a coin flip and being right, it couldn't be more accurate. This guy is flip-flopping left, right, and center all the time when it comes to him being on the money with reporting. I have seen him live in real time be the first to break various forms of news the past 4.5 years, the same way that I've also seen him miss constantly on things that he otherwise thought he had. And another thing that sticks out like a sore thumb to me here is two key things. It's one, if this was actually true to the point of it being a certainty, why wouldn't Hector Gomez tweet it out abruptly right away for breaking news? Because this is a massive scoop should this be accurate. If you're someone of his stature who gets paid dollars to literally break news, wouldn't it be in his best interest to actually put out a post like he has done countless times in the past? Breaking: the New York Mets are going to sign Framber Valdez. The expectation is that it'll be a 6-year, $200 million contract. So the fact that he just casually replied to a fellow follower of mine, shout out to, again, Luis Valdez on X, just talking about Valdez, is kind of telling to me that this is far more based off of, I'm sure, credible speculation than it is an actual certainty of happening right now. Because there's also something that can be had, which is the brokenness when you're trying to have someone like Hector Gomez, who doesn't have English as his first language, especially, that has been a little choppy at times when he has posted things on X before where you haven't necessarily fully understood what he is trying to say, meaning that it's broken English to a degree, where you may have him come out with a post and he says this thing, but if you take one word and replace it with the other word, it completely changes the game from it being a certainty to him just sharing his opinion. And currently, from everything that I've evaluated, I'd imagine that this is more the latter, meaning that this is, again, credible speculation. Someone who has heard throughout the industry, who is well aware that Valdez has been connected to the Mets and is believing from what he has been relaying that the expectations that, yes, the Mets are the favorites to land Framber Valdez, and when it happens, it'll be around 6 years, $200 million. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that should the Mets, in fact, land Valdez, a more credible reporting from Ken Rosenthal, from Jeff Passan, from John Heyman, Robert Murray, the laundry list. There's a lot of guys that have more credibility than Hector, and I don't mean that rudely. It's just a fact. These guys know when to post things, when things are more often than not fairly right versus when it's clearly not right. And Gomez falls in the category of someone who kind of tends to relay information whenever he gets relayed info. I mean, he's the same guy who said for years how guys like Mike Trout, among others, are going to be traded to different destinations when it obviously has not and more than likely will not happen. So I say take this with a grain of salt regarding Gomez's post here. And if you want to take it with even less than that, you are perfectly inclined to do so. But knowing that we're a Mets channel and knowing that we cover everything regarding the club and knowing that this has picked up steam from this past night, which I anticipated that it would, but I didn't want to have this conversation until today because I didn't want it to deviate away from our other topics last night. Because if someone clicks on a video right away and they see Hector Gomez's name, and they firmly believe he's not credible to begin with, and may deter them from having any interest in watching the remainder of the video, let alone listening on the other topics of McNeil, Peralta, Glasnow, what have you. So that is why we're talking about it now again. But both things can be true at the same time when we break this down. Framber Valdez is expected to get a contract around that length, and the Mets have been in that market. However, to what degree, that has been the big question. That is what Gomez is supposedly trying to break the barrier on, that the Mets are in fact the favorites, that they are going to land him. So, okay, let's play devil's advocate, and let's go ahead and say that Hector's very confident in this because he has credible sourcing that tells him this will be the case. So should this be relayed from those bigger names I mentioned, I will go out of my way to say how great of a job Gomez did for being one of the first people to essentially have this scoop this accurately, this close to the dollar and number amount of years than anyone else in the game. But until that happens, I'm still taking it with a grain of salt. But let's talk about this now. Let's just discuss Framber Valdez signing with the New York Mets, okay? Because 6 years, $200 million. Let's do the math here. Let's just do the quick AAV. If we're going to do 200 divided by 6, we're at $33.3 million a season for Framber Valdez. Now, I think of a specific quote that Ken Rosenthal, the Athletic, who's far more credible, came out with this past week that we broke down the platform in recent videos. I implore you guys to check it out if you haven't already, as I broke down at great length the following, which is that, yes, Ken Rosenthal stated verbatim to Foul Territory that he fully expects the New York Mets to sign a big name starter this offseason. Like, that's a lock. That's going to happen, is really what he was saying. But again, Rosenthal, that's more credible speculation than it is factual, firm reporting. But Ken has a lot of sources, a lot of industry connections, and he obviously understands to a degree how the Mets are operating. So he also did state that for the first time as Mets president, David Stearns is going to operate differently from what he previously has. He's not going to be nearly as conservative. He's going to be aggressive, and he is going to change his own philosophy for the sake of knowing his right and wrongs from being Mets PO the past couple of years, what's worked and what hasn't. And the Mets are a team that hasn't been completely opposed to fairly long-term deals for starters, but it's been at the right price and the right circumstance because, mind you, they threw $325 million, which would have been the largest contract in baseball at the time for a pitcher, to Yamamoto before he took that and said, yes, I'll land with the Dodgers, for a guy who didn't even pitch in the bigs yet. So the Mets do have an appetite to spend big dollars on pitching. They've actually spent more on pitchers since Steve Cohen became owner than any other team in baseball when looking at multi-year deals in particular. Between relievers and starters, no other team has signed more guys to those deals than the Mets. The problem is, how many of those contracts since Steve Cohen became owner have actually been justified? And you can rightfully argue few of them have been justified. Edwin Diaz has been justified, no doubt about it, from the bullpen front. Smaller deals, Brooks Raley justified on a multi-year contract. When you look at key pieces of the rotation, how many guys are really justified signing a multi-year deal? Clay Holmes had a solid first year as a New York Met, but was he really warranted of being on a 3-year contract? The jury's still out with that. Sean Manaea's first year was horrendous because he couldn't stay healthy. Frankie Montas, more like Montas, and I don't need to say anything else about that. The list goes on and on. Stearns himself has done a far from great job in that regard. So David Stearns, the same man who has had a previous philosophy as one who has not had an appetite much to go after big-name starters past the age of 30 that have a qualifying offer attached to them. And, of course, you're only probably going to get half of that pitcher at his best in what would be a longer-term contract, meaning that if he signs 6 years, you're probably going to get 3 really good years out of Valdez, and then the drop-off is more than likely going to happen. And having said that, why would Stearns deviate away from that previous philosophy, especially now? And there's a simple answer. The Mets are in a win-now stage. They have endless assets to make happen, and there's a realistic possibility that they could go ahead and sign a top pitcher like Valdez and still trade for one in the market heading into next season. And in doing so, they would trade away Senga, they would trade away McNeil, and they would trade away some other assets that they feel are part of the problem and not part of the solution for 2026. And Valdez, say what you will about him, because I think we can all agree, if he wasn't a schmuck and have that little scenario with this catcher happen this past season, not much of any of us would probably gripe about Valdez's ability other than his age. That's all this really comes down to. So let's just kick to the curb that little instance that happened with the catcher last year. Let's just say it won't mean anything. Let's say his attitude will be fine. Let's just play devil's advocate here, okay? Even in that scenario, Valdez is entering his age 32 season. If you sign him on 6 years, he'll be 38 by the time he's done. Steve Cohen has had an appetite to eat back-ended contracts when they have not aged well in the past, i.e. Robinson Cano and James McCann. Would he be willing to do the same here for Valdez should he not age all that well and age more like milk than, say, a fine wine into his later 30s? I'd imagine that would be the case, but the jury's still out there. But why, again, would David Stearns do something that he's been so opposed to doing in the past? It's because the Mets need certainty. They not only need ace caliber arms in their rotation right now, but they need guys that are going to be a lock in what you're getting. And for the next couple of years, we pretty much know what we're getting from Framber Valdez, and he's been one of the best pitchers in baseball. This past season, 31 starts, 192 innings, a 3.6 ERA, a 3.75 expected ERA, a 3.37 FIP, a 3.6 expected FIP, a roughly 9 K per nine to a 3 walks per nine, a 4-WAR season for Valdez, who has no nose on his resume, World Series championships on his resume, huge playoff performer on his resume. He literally has every box checked off for the New York Mets, but where he lacks is A, he has a qualifying offer attached to him, so if the Mets sign him, you have to give up draft pick compensation and draft pick itself. B, you also look at him not getting any younger, so again, this is just one of these guys that doesn't necessarily fit the mold of wanting to invest 6 years. Like 3 years, high AV, I could see the Mets all over Valdez. 6 years is where we kind of find ourselves not necessarily knowing how truthful that is, and that's why we have to wait and see what actually comes of this from people that have more credible reporting in the near future. But what I'm here to tell you is that even though Framber Valdez did not meet with the New York Mets at GM meetings, as he was one of the few top free agents that was actually available and in attendance in said meetings there in Vegas, Nevada that we saw over the past month, even though the Mets did not meet with him, it doesn't mean that they're not involved in his market, nor does it mean that they are not saying the favorites to land him. Because, listen, who called him the favorite? That being the New York Mets. What reporter outside of Hector Gomez said that the Mets are like a perfect fit and favorite for Framber Valdez? Oh, yeah. Did I forget to tell you? Jeff Passan. You know, we have seen this constant connection. Jeff Passan, the most reputable reporter in all of baseball right now of ESPN, has come out with previous pieces and stated that he expects Valdez to kind of be that big rotation pickup that the Mets make in the free agent market this offseason. He's already been on record in his previous articles stating exactly that as like best fit Framber Valdez. So what does Jeff Passan see? What does Hector Gomez see that the fans, including myself, have not seen? And what they see is what they have been relayed. And what they've been relayed comes from credible people in the industry. And yes, Valdez being connected to the Mets helps inflate his market more than anything because the Mets have the richest owner in baseball. There's incentive from these people to go out of their way to throw the Mets' name in that ring just for the sake of stirring the pot and getting the bidding war to go. But what we could also agree on is that if the Mets firmly do believe Framber Valdez is a viable rotational option for them, and a southpaw who would be dominant for them, paired with Noah McLean, and hopefully one other key starter that they can land this offseason, not only would it do wonders for this rotation, not only would it make the Mets look like a rotation that was fickle, having one of the better ones in the National League, again, if you can add one more quality starter along with Valdez, it's a night and day difference heading into next season when you look at your depth among other things. This is why, again, this would be appealing for David Stearns of the Mets. You're in a win now stage. You have the ability to spend plenty right now, and you can do this spending while still operating as a big market team and not a team that has to then operate solely on the margins after the fact because they're the kind of Will Ponzine type regime. Thankfully, that ship has sailed, but the point still stands. There's a lot of pros and cons that go into evaluating Valdez on a long-term contract, and it doesn't just go in hand with the initial reporting that lacks true credibility, you could rightfully argue, but it goes more in hand with the fact of what I just said. The pros, one of the most consistent and dominant starters that we've seen in the American League and in baseball for the past half decade. The cons, not getting any younger, has likely peaked in his career already, and is probably not going to age well a couple years into his contract. I personally also have a level of concern with how Valdez keeps his body up and his health right moving forward. And the only reason why I say that truthfully is because I just saw Frankie Montas in real time show up to spring training this past year, look like a buddy who's more prepared for his barbecue pitmasters show than he was spring training, and hurt himself significantly in the first bullpen he threw for the Mets this past season. So that still pisses me off. And I get concerned by that when I see other guys that are big in frame, but also may fluctuate a little bit in weight. And now that Valdez looks like he's a Bartolo clone, Big Sexy out here, but something to be said about Big Sexy is that he was an anomaly of a pitcher at that size. There was reasons why guys outside of him simply didn't make it all that much. I mean, Lance Lynn falls in that category too, but kind of slim pickings. You know, Valdez, while I'm looking at him right now, he doesn't look like a guy that strikes me as like, oh, I'm a very heavier set guy. I just wonder how he's going to grade with his overall health. How is he going to be able to keep his health regimen up? Like, those are things I genuinely care about, because I'll refer to my guy and Anthony Recker going back a couple years ago on MLB Network stating how Alek Manoah would love to see you get in the gym more, buddy, because you have all this talent, but you just don't look like you're keeping up with your body the way that you should be. It's fitting because Manoah has not been a good starter in baseball since that point and will probably never be a full mainstream starter at the major league level ever again. And it went in direct hand because he did not treat his body right. There's no denying it. Valdez has had the track record. He's had the credibility. And as you guys can see from the following, he's had a lot to be happy about throughout his career when looking at the consistency. So I will not at all put it past him to suggest that he can't keep his body right. I just have a little bit of a PTSD moment going back to the Frankie Montas signing and how much that failed for the Mets. I also look at Sean Manaea, who I like a lot, but Sean's frame can vary exactly in how quality you're going to be getting him throughout the course of the year. Valdez kind of falls. Valdez honestly looks like a perfect blend when looking at his size and his frame of a Sean Manaea and a Frankie Montas. He's kind of like a mesh of the two here, just looking at him and looking at them. But does that mean that that's going to at all hinder him when looking at his health availability? Not sure, because what we have seen is that since the 2021 season, Valdez has been a dog. 134 innings then, a 3.1 ERA. 2022, 200 innings, 2.8 ERA. 2023, 198 innings, 3.4 ERA. 2024, 176 innings, 2.9. 2025 in his walk year, 192 at a 3.6. So even though Valdez's expected numbers aren't overly sexy, he's still unbelievably reliable and has stayed very steady throughout his career as a ace caliber starter. So for the New York Mets here, does it make sense to land Framber Valdez? I absolutely do believe it makes a lot of sense for them. But do I think that he is the best option for them if, say, he was the only starter that they landed this offseason? I'm not sure, because I do think that there are better fits in the trade market than anything that the Mets could possibly be offered right now in the free agent market. I say that as someone who really likes Tatsuo Imai. I say that as someone who sees the upside still in Michael Cain, who sees a level of upside in Zach Gallen, the East Coast native, and obviously sees a lot of upside in Framber Valdez. I just don't know to what degree, how good and how consistent they're going to be for this team. But when we're looking at certainty, when we're looking at previous track records, look no further than Framber Valdez, who has been without a doubt the most polished, the most reliable, and the best looking option out of all starters initially entering this market. 10 times out of 10, Valdez always looked like a better option than Cease. He's far more reliable than Cease, but the only downside with Valdez, outside of throwing to his catcher essentially, is his age, just being a couple years older, entering his age 32 season. Not the end of the world, but something you have to bear in mind when you're going to get tied down to long-term contracts, which obviously the Mets don't just want to do for the sake of doing, understandably so. Now, to continue a bit more on Framber Valdez, let's talk briefly on his arsenal, because there's a lot to like about this too. Now, as you guys can see from his Baseball Savant page from this past season, Valdez has a little bit of a mixed bag in what we're getting here. We have 70th percentile in pitching run value, 91st in fastball run value, a great fastball still that we see, 38th in breaking run value, 19th in off-speed run value, 61st in expected ERA, league average and expected batting average, and fastball velocity, well below league average and average exit velocity, so unfortunately, he has been getting hit for good velo. Chase percentage is above league average, almost 70th percentile, above league average in whiff percentage, above league average in K percentage, just below league average in walk percentage, but not the end of the world, well above league average in barrel percentage, well below league average in hard hit percentage, because even though he's not getting barreled, he's still getting hit hard. So that's something to bear in mind. With Valdez, he averaged 0.7 home runs per nine this past season. Would that inflate? Would that deflate with the New York Mets at a pitcher's park half the year? I'd like to think it would only go down more, but just something to bear in mind, he hasn't had the best numbers when looking at how hard he's been hit and the velocity he's given up. 97th in ground ball percentage. This is the key takeaway for Valdez. He is a ground ball merchant, and he is supreme in doing so. If you bring in someone like Valdez, Marcus Semien, Francisco Lindor, who already look like one of the best middle infields in baseball, they're going to get a lot of work. A lot of work. And not only are they going to get a lot of work, but whoever's at third base is going to get a lot of work. Whoever's at first base is going to get a lot of work. So there's something to be said about not only going after someone like Valdez, but making sure that you have the right infield configuration for a pitcher like him to have the most success. Valdez in the hot corner for a very long time had a guy like Alex Bregman there. So clearly there wasn't too much of a liability over the years in that Astros infield versus maybe what they might be getting moving forward. Whereas when you look at the New York Mets here, Brett Beatty is, of course, a vacuum at third, but we don't even know if he's going to be on the team next season because there's a lot of trade rumblings going on still. Mark Vientos is not a guy anyone wants to play in the infield position, so I'm not going to try to pitch that to you. Ronnie Mauricio, Wissam Acuna, if they're not traded, they have defensive value, but they vary in degrees. So the point stands. The Mets, if they want to bring in someone like Valdez, if they're going to bring in someone like Valdez at 6 years, $200 million, you have to, A, be able to comfortably handle that $33+ million AAV hit while still spending elsewhere, while doing your best to bring back, hopefully, both Alonso and Diaz, while hopefully adding at least one more other quality bat this offseason in the outfield, or maybe part of the infield if you do, in fact, trade Beatty and or Vientos, some others. But it's not just those things, but it's knowing how you have your first base and your third base in particular figured out. Alonso getting reps at first versus DH will be key, as well as who, again, the Mets have for certain at third base. Given the uncertainty there, it has me also uncertain as to truly how heavy of a pursuit the Mets are in right now on Valdez. So, like I said before, and I'll say it again, take it with a grain of salt at 6 years, $200 million. But definitely do not write the Mets off entirely in Valdez's market, because it's telling that they may in fact be more involved than maybe what we initially thought. Sinker at 44% of the arsenal, by the way. He sits right around 94, 95 on. Curveball, 33% of the arsenal. He's sitting right around 79. We're looking at changeup, 18% of the arsenal, right around 90. We're looking at slider, 3% of the arsenal, right around 84, 85. And the four seam that we see at 2% of the arsenal, sitting right around 94. So even though his velo is not overly dominant, as a starter, sits mid-90s, has upper echelon in the velocity when he's really right. But the fact that he's still in 91st percentile in fastball run value is telling you that he has a quality pitch there. And he has gotten a good amount of swing to miss. And he's also done a very good job on just, again, staying afloat as a reliable option. Final thing I have to say about Valdez, to use as an asterisk when you evaluate him, the Astros have been notorious over the years on getting the best out of pitchers with their own pitching lab, but having struggles when they leave the organization. It's more so in hand with relievers than it is starters, I've noticed, but it still holds true. You think of Hector Neris, you think of Ryan Stanek, you think of Phil Maton, all relievers that had their best years when they were in Houston together. When you think of Garrett Cole, kind of an anomaly, goes to the lab there, works on the sticky stuff, and yes, that was apparent back then when everyone was doing it. That's why Bauer got upset about it. I haven't said that name in years, crazy to say. And he was doing what he was doing because how much he was pissed off that Garrett Cole was getting Cy Young votes for doing the exact same thing, essentially, when he was cheating. So Cole signs a monster contract with the Yankees. He's still a very good pitcher, so you can't use him as an example. You can't really use Verlander either because he's been in Houston for so long now. But, I think to a degree of other guys like Jake Odorizzi, levels of success, doesn't have the same extent elsewhere. I think of just the Astros' ability to maximize talent. And when they don't have an appetite for that talent anymore, there's a reason for it. And the Astros are a winning organization, so there's something to be said about them not going at all out of their way to bring Framber Valdez back. And I think that's something that not only the Mets, but other teams should continue to bear in mind when evaluating his market. Regardless of what the Astros' reasons are, it's abundantly clear that ship has sailed with their relationship with Valdez, barring changes, so we shouldn't expect it to be anything otherwise at the moment. But Framber Valdez, if the Mets land him, will I be happy? Absolutely. The Mets need ace caliber starters in their rotation. Valdez is one of, if not the most polished option currently out there. And you don't have to give up assets like you would in the trade market. You'd be getting immediate certainty in what you're getting right now. And hey, if the back end of that contract ain't going to look good, you worry about it then when you have to worry about it. Not right now when you're in this win-down stage while having an abundance of assets in the farm to utilize and various deals should you wish to do so. But Mets fans, again, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below on all that we broke down today regarding Framber Valdez and the rumblings that's going on with him. Do you believe that not only are the Mets the favorites to land him, but also the fact that you have someone like him at 6 years, $200 million? Or do you think that David Stearns is not even going to go anywhere near said deal for someone like Valdez? How much is David Stearns going to deviate away from his previous philosophy to change things up this offseason for the better for this club? That has yet to be seen. So until then, folks, we're going to continue to break down all news and rumors in Mets land. And once we get actual breaking news on who the Mets signed, who the Mets trade for, we'll be right back here to break it down as we always do. Thank you guys so much again. Enjoy your holiday weekend to all who have celebrated a very happy Thanksgiving. I'll see you all again real soon. Let's go Mets, baby. Peace out.